Thank you very much. Neil Buckley from the Financial Times newspaper. Mr. President, you've been reported as having told at least one of your counterparts in recent years, one of your global counterparts, that you do not consider Ukraine to be a real country. You consider it to be a country that was made up from parts of other countries. Could I ask you to confirm on the record here whether that is what you believe, or whether you think that Ukraine does have the right to exist as a sovereign independent country, and indeed is a real country? If so, is the region that you have frequently referred to recently as Novorossiya a part of that sovereign country? If that is the case, why have a number of newspaper reporters, including one from my own newspaper, encountered soldiers wearing Russian uniform and insignia in parts of Novorossiya in recent days? And I would like to take the opportunity to express absolute confidence here in the veracity of reporting of one of our reporters on that issue, despite what we consider a highly inappropriate criticism of her work by Russian authorities this afternoon. Thank you.
First of all, as regards my opinion of Ukraine as a sovereign state, I have never doubted or confronted the fact that Ukraine is a modern-day, full-fledged, sovereign European nation. Another issue is that Ukraine's history in its present borders is a very complicated historical process. But don't you know that? Don't you know that in 1922, a part of the territories that used to belong to the Russian Empire, which historically were called Malorossiya, because it was a single region with its center in Novorossiysk, in the city of Novorossiysk in the south of Russia, and that region was called Novorossiya. That's Lugansk, Kharkov, Donetsk, Nikolaev, Kherson, Odessa. In the 1920s, in 1921, 1922, when the Soviet Union was actually established, those territories were handed over from Russia to Ukraine. The communists who ruled Russia back then, their rationale was simple. They wanted to increase the share of the proletariat in Ukraine, probably in order to secure themselves more votes during various elections, because peasants were considered to be petty bourgeoisie who were always critical of communists. So they wanted to have a greater share of proletariat in Crimea. That was reason number one. Secondly, I believe during the Russian Civil War, a part of Ukrainian nationalists, they actually tried to fight for those exactly territories, for Novorossiya. And the communists were actually trying to tell the Ukrainians, you see, those nationalists were trying to win those territories from us, and we just give them to you. That was not considered a loss for Russia, because all our republics were parts of a single state, of the Soviet Union. Back in 1954, Nikita Khrushchev, who was in the habit of banging his shoe on the podium in the United Nations, he decided for some reason to cede Crimea to Ukraine. That was actually done in violation of Soviet law back then. According to Soviet law, in order to take some territory from one Union Republic and pass it over to another, you needed endorsement from the Supreme Soviets of both of those republics. That was not done. Instead, that decision was merely rubber-stamped by a decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the Russian Socialist Federation and Ukraine, not the Supreme Council itself, but only its Presidium. That was a violation of the law. Following the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Crimea demanded autonomy with broad competences, but unfortunately the Ukrainian government effectively liquidated that autonomy and concentrated all the essential competences in the hands of the central government in Kiev. That's as far as southern Ukraine is concerned. Now, as to the west of Ukraine, don't you know that some parts of Ukraine were actually taken from Poland or Hungary as a result of the Second World War? Think back to where Lvov was before the end of World War II. It was a Polish city. Don't you know that? If you do, why are you asking such a question? In return for that, Poland received some territories that used to be East Germany before, and its original German population was misplaced and was actually expelled from those territories. There is still a big community of people who used to live there. Was that good or bad? I won't comment on that, but that was done. And you need to acknowledge, to recognize the fact that Ukraine is a very complex state, a complex nation in terms of its territorial setup. We proceed from this historic background, but that does not mean that if, following a Western-backed coup d'etat in Ukraine, the population of Crimea felt concerned for their own security and the future of their children, and they used this international rule that grants them the right to self-determination. This does not mean that we do not respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We actually do respect it. And I do hope that the relations between Russia and Ukraine will normalize in the future and will develop in the future. I think that's inevitable.